I would like to call to order the meeting of Committee of the Whole for Thursday, February 15th, 2024. Madam Clerk, may you please call the roll?
Alderwoman Schweitzer,
Present.
Alderman Oldenburg, Alderman Cone,
Present.
Alderman Narayan,
Here.
Alderman Balmer, Alderwoman Velazquez,
Present.
Chairwoman Sanye,
Present.
Alderwoman Spencer,
Present.
Alderman Browning, Alderwoman Clark Hubbard,
Here.
Alderwoman Keys, Alderwoman Tyus, Alderwoman Boyd, Alderman Aldridge, President Green,
Present.
Alderman Oldenburg, Alderman Balmer, Alderman Browning, Alderwoman Keys, Alderwoman Tyus, Alderwoman Boyd, Alderman Aldridge.
Present.
9 present, you have quorum.
A quorum being present, we will dispense with line items 2 through 5. Today's Committee of the Whole, we're going to do things just a bit different since we will be having our very first panel to talk about one of the suggestions for our ability to move forward. But we will start off with remarks from President Green.
Actually going to turn it over to Christina Garmendia from my office to go through the results of the survey that closed a couple weeks ago. I want to commend the board. We've had over 16,000 people register for the RAMS portal so far. We had about, I think, a little over 12,000 people who ended up casting ballots. And so we got a lot of really great data from that, and I'll turn it over to Christina to walk us through that data before we dive into the rest of the discussion.
Thank you, President Green. Before Ms. Garmendia starts, I just want to make sure that I thank her and thank your office for all the work that you're doing. This is going to be a little different because Director Garmendia and I are going to give this presentation together. So Garmendia has worked and sorted through all of the results and everything that came in, and then we kind of worked together to kind of look at certain aspects and highlight certain populations. So Ms. Garmendia will start the presentation and she will get us deep into it, and then at some point we will alternate and I will continue the presentation. But Ms. Garmendia, you can go ahead and start.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen, and I will be as punchy as I can so that we can get to the panel where we have some guests joining us. And just as a reminder, the community engagement thus far, we had a kickoff survey in August through October of last year, where we asked residents to share their challenges. And we used those insights to inform the priority challenges, the resolution 159 that the board passed in last year. We opened the ideas portal where we started getting ideas for the RAM settlement in August, and that will remain open until August of this year. So just because we've started having activities where we're voting on different ideas does not, as a public member of the public, does not mean that the ideation stops. But what I've highlighted is the phase that we just completed, where for a month from January 5th through February 5th-ish, we had a voting period open for the public where they could elevate. Basically, the purpose of that was to elevate ideas for our consideration at the board. And just to give, and for everyone's reference, this is just going to be a sampling, like the highlights of the report, but the full report is on the RAMS engagement portal. It is in the drive as well. and I believe all the members of the board were emailed a copy of this, and it should be in your inbox. So overall, just to give by the numbers, there were 7 priority challenges, and the staff in the president's office over the December, not break, but over the month of December, called from the 700 ideas that were submitted through the idea portal. 100 of those were unique ideas that were in line with the priority challenges the board identified as priorities. And from those 100, we selected 20 that kind of addressed multiple of those challenges or were unique or popular to put towards a public vote. How this vote worked is that each person that participated received 10 votes. We had a total of 12,440 vote participants, with 96% of those online. But we also received 452 paper forms that were the result of either town halls or canvassing. And so just as a reminder of, I have up top here some of the priority challenges summarized, from increasing community mobility to upgrading water infrastructure. These were some of the ideas that were in line with those priority challenges that we elevated for the people's consideration. And many of these ideas could realistically, they count for 2 or more than 1 priority challenge, such as increasing community mobility. The downtown street and sidewalk infrastructure arguably is that, as well as catalyzing downtown reinvestment. There were a total of 20 ideas. So, and here's the other a sampling of the other priority challenges. But as you can see, we tried to have a variety of options under each priority challenge. Idea selection is always, there's not a pure science to it. And I'm sure there was, our alder people heard from their constituents about ideas that were missing. But this vote that we had was a process of cumulative voting. And so it allows participants to express their approval and their priorities across a meaningful range of choices. There is a risk with using cumulative voting, so that 10 votes is that it does allow, a small group of people can strategically concentrate their votes on a single option to engineer the outcome. But if you frame that another way, it really provides an opportunity for community organizing to have an impact. And I'll talk a little bit about that towards the end of my time. But just like with the survey, it was important for us to assess representation of who participated in the vote. And while we had a lot of fields that are optional for people to fill in, like race, age, income, ward, relationship to the city, a lot of people did submit their information. So first off, 76%, so more than 3/4 of the people who participated are city residents. 16% identify themselves as non-residents, but they either work in the city, own a business, or visit frequently. And then the remainder, we're not quite sure. But so the vast, majority of the people who took the survey or participated in the vote are residents. We looked at race, and so this is from the data that we have from the people who shared it. And what I'm highlighting here is that just like with the survey, we do have underrepresentation from our Black community. And so one of the choices we've made with the report is to show disaggregated data. And so we're highlighting what the Black and African American community prioritized and comparing it to the white community. So you'll be able to individually, as if you want to weight, or better reflect what your ward or what your neighborhood would or community would identify as a priority, you'll be able to see that. Then, as far as age, we have a we had a great turnout in the middle categories, middle-aged folks, if you between 30s, 40s, 50s, and so what we have here is just a lot of underrepresentation of our younger residents and our older residents. And so we've pulled out those that are under 25, the results, and the results for those that are over 60. And then for household income, here you can see in the blue line is the percentage of our population at different income levels. And the red line is the income self-identified by our voting participants. And so you can see we have overrepresentation from people in higher incomes, and that tracks with being pretty dependent on an online platform. And so we are pulling out the results for people whose household income is under 50,000. And then the ward turnout was great. And by the way, we had we had a great turnout from comparing from the kickoff survey to the voting exercise. So really, congratulations to all. It's actually this bar chart is very similar to the distribution from the survey. So we have lower turnout in wards 3, 11, 12, and 13. So we're taking note and seeing how we can improve on that in the future. And then there are some wards that, like Ward 12, that got a significant number of their votes from the canvassing effort that was put forth by one of their residents. So to the exciting stuff. So the most popular ideas, those that received over 8,000 votes, include replacement of water mains, traffic calming and pedestrian-friendly street design, increased wages or salaries for city employees, and free or municipally subsidized childcare for residents. And notably, for the replacement of water mains, it not only received the most votes, it also had the most unique vote participants. Then, like promised, we wanted to share the top ideas from Black voters. And so we had over 1,200 participants who identify as Black. And what is interesting is that there's the number one is definitely different. It's the redevelopment revolving loan fund. And one thing that was also interesting about Black voters' choices is that more than 50% of Black voters support the top two ideas here, the revolving loan fund, as well as the subsidized childcare for residents idea. If you go back and look at overall, replacement of water mains got somewhere in the, I think is the 46, 48%, very close to a majority, but not a total majority. But then similar to overall voters, increased wages or salaries, and then replacement of water mains. When you look at income, so we were able to pull out 1,827 participants who have incomes under $50,000. And for them too, their number one choice was something different than for the overall population. The municipally subsidized childcare for residents was their top choice, followed by increased wages or salaries for city employees, then the redevelopment revolving loan fund, and then replacement of water mains. When you look at age, under 25, we had 644 participants. The trends here with what they prioritized were around community mobility. So traffic calming was at the top of their list, followed by increased wages or salaries for city workers, improving downtown streets and sidewalks, and the redevelopment revolving loan fund. And when you look at participants over the age of 60, we had just over 1,000 participants in this age range. The number one choice was replacement of water mains. And again, this is more than 50%. So what's 71% of our participants over 60 voted for replacement of water mains. and followed by rehabilitation of water treatment plants. So water infrastructure is really strong and important to this cohort, and followed by increasing wages or salaries for city workers, and then hiring dedicated code enforcement officers for vacant properties. When we look at the top ideas by ward, I pulled out here the ideas that were the #1 rank for that ward. And so 5 wards had replacement of water mains as their top priority. And interestingly, these are all in South and Southwest St. Louis, wards 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. While traffic calming, pedestrian-friendly street design was the top choice for those central and south central wards, 6, 7, 8, and 9. Redevelopment revolving loan fund was the top choice for our north wards, 10, 11, 12, and 13, and Ward 14, downtown, and north chose downtown streets and sidewalks as their top priority. When you include both their #1 and their #2 rank, I tried to show what it would look like, and you add their second ranked choice. Replacement of water mains grows to being highly supported by 8 wards, adding 6, 9, and 10. Traffic calming adds some more of the central downtown wards, 9 and 14. But 2 other ideas kind of pop to the surface here. Increased worker wages is something that's supported both north and south, wards 1, 2, 4, 12, and 13. And then subsidized childcare for residents is the #2 priority for wards 3, 7, and 11. Kind of this, if you look up Jefferson, basically. And then the redevelopment revolving loan fund doesn't gain any new wards, putting it as their #2 choice, but downtown streets and sidewalks gains the other downtown centric ward, Ward 8. Lastly, I did want to shout out to the a section on our Canvas voters. These are the people that took paper forms. And like I mentioned before, cumulative voting provides an opportunity for community organizing to have an impact. And so we had some very strong organizing happening by a Ward 12 resident who canvassed in 10, 12, and 13, I believe. And for her idea that she posted in the Ideas portal, which Paula Vickers, shout out to her, which was around subsidized childcare for residents. And she, of those paper forms, 94% of them supported subsidized childcare. They combined their votes, and 74% of their canvas, the canvas votes was for childcare. And if you had integrated these votes with the online, so just as a, maybe forgot to mention this, but all the stats I showed before, it was just online. But if you were, and one reason for that is that we didn't collect demographic information from paper on the paper forms, so I couldn't do the breakdowns like that. But if these paper votes were integrated with the online votes, then subsidized childcare would have risen to the #1 spot in terms of votes, and #3 in terms of vote participants who support that idea. So it can have a great impact. We did separate them, but just because we didn't have any formal involvement with training of canvassers. But it's just very interesting, and we wanted to make sure to share it. And so just some of my major takeaways, and then I'll hand it over to Alderwoman Sanier. From my biggest takeaways from looking at all this data and disaggregating it is that we ultimately 10 ideas received some level of support from 30% or more of vote participants. So that means that there's a lot of good ideas out there for the use of the RAM settlement that have the support of the community. The other thing is that no idea overall received support from more than 50% of all participants. And that means that there's no single idea for the RAM settlement that will make everyone happy. You all know that already, but wanted to remind everyone. And then the idea that was supported by the most participants and with the most votes was replacement of water mains. And overall, we found residents like that's an idea that impacts all residents in some way, requires a significant amount of money to address, and is a core city function. And so that's my overall takeaway. And I will hand it off to Alderwoman Sanier for her thoughts. And I'll just let me know when to advance the slide.
Thank you. Okay, we can go to the next slide. So one of my recommendations, I think the whole purpose of the committee of the whole in doing this very, rigorous, intensive community engagement process is to identify, what is it that the people who we represent really want. And so just like we're going to do today in today's meeting with baking out with a municipal endowment fund, it would be my recommendation that we also hold hearings to discuss the replacement of water mains, traffic calming and pedestrian friendly design, the increase of wages or salaries for city employees, free or subsidized childcare for residents, and redevelopment revolving loan funds, since these were the dominant ideas that were given from the survey. And what I think is interesting too is not only were these ideas the dominant ones amongst everyone, these ideas also were very cohesively supported across the city, and especially across some groups that, as I think Ms. Garmendia mentioned, kind of what Black participants were interested in. But as we go further, we'll talk about some other groups that I think we should be paying attention to as well. We can go to the next slide. I also just want to reinforce that any ideas for the RAM settlement will be discussed in the committee of the whole for these public hearings. I just want to make sure that our community is clear that we are having conversations not only with each other, but with communities. And we very much want this to be a process that doesn't happen, for a community, but with community. Some of the things that we should explore that I think we'll model this today with this municipal endowment fund, but the feasibility of these ideas, what does it really look like? What will it take? And obviously that's going to lead us into a cost analysis. We know that that's a very important of the conversation. We also really need to consider the fiscal impact that any of these ideas will have on a city, especially as we discuss ideas like a municipal endowment fund. As we bake that out, I think we'll start to understand why it's important to consider what the long-term costs are of some of these ideas, the social impact on residents, the traffic calming and pedestrian idea that's in a portal. I think ideas like that and things that we see that have support across our city, really evaluating how our decision to invest and eventually propose measures for these things impact our community's feelings about them, and the availability of additional funding sources. Because obviously one of the things that we have working to our benefit is that even though we have the RAM settlement funds, there are ideas that made it to, originally the top 20 and now the top 5, that there may be grant funds and other things. And I certainly don't think we should limit ourselves to just the money that we have within our RAM settlement, but explore all of our fiscal options. Today, for today's committee of the whole, we're going to focus on the municipal endowment fund. I think that has been an idea that has been honestly probably the most widely accepted and welcomed as I've been around to different communities and talked to the mayor's office and the comptroller's office and the president's office and all of my colleagues. That's an idea that's gotten resounding input. And today we're also going to talk about the convention center renovation. And I want to thank Ms. Ratcliffe for being in attendance today from Explore St. Louis to help us walk this idea out. But again, the purpose of these meetings is to have a public and transparent process. And that is the perfect opening to get us into the idea exploration for the Municipal Endowment Fund. What is a municipal endowment fund? It is an endowment fund that would be a legal structure to manage investments for our city that are independent of the organizations that they support. They are typically, charitable and nonprofit institutions, but the idea is to keep the principal intact and to use the other parts of the funding to generate revenue potentially for generations to come. I think it's important that we talk about, what does it mean? The municipal part would be the new part, would be the part that St. Louis honestly might be a national leader in. We have many endowment funds, they're common in universities, but there is not many municipal endowment funds. And so some of the things that we will discuss today is what makes something municipal. Is it that it's seed funded by the city? Is it administered by the city? Is it used strictly for municipal purposes? And those are ideas that I look forward to walking out today with our panel. The components of an endowment fund are extremely important. Obviously, you have the endowment, which is what you originally sow into it, and then the interest that you would get. Because the beauty of an endowment fund is that it has the ability to grow beyond what you originally planted, and then that interest to come and ideas on how we would reinvest that into the principal so that we can keep that fund going, but also how we invest it into, I think to Ms. Garmendia's point, there are various ideas that are popular across the city. And so how do we use this endowment fund to support those ideas in a sustainable manner? Why establish an endowment fund? Like I mentioned, it is one of the ideas for me. I've really taken time to talk to, all of my colleagues and work with the president's office and the mayor's office about why this. But one of the things to remember is that in 23 years, we will have spent $250 million without touching the principle of a conservatively interest on it conservatively, because we don't know how we will manage it, what the final decisions will be. But if we were to manage this conservatively, it has the potential to feed us for many, many generations to come. And how much would be available? Obviously, we all know right now the RAM settlement initially came to us in $250 million. We know that our treasurer and our city leaders have placed that fund into an interest-bearing account. So even that money is drawing, but is growing. But here are just some starting amounts of what that could look like. But that doesn't mean that we would sell all of the $250 million into an endowment fund. We may decide to do, a partial amount of any of these increments. And then it's also important that we talk about investment strategies. Any investment has its risk, depending on how you diversify your investments, depending on the ideas that you invest money on and what they yield. And so just making sure that we're looking at the risk that is a part of those investments. And then obviously the endowment growth strategy would have to be something that we would talk about and be clear on as a city and whoever might manage that fund, so that we can make sure that that amount that is reinvested, is really critical and that we consider that so that this is a sustainable fund. How much would the annual spend grow? I know that this is a common question. I reached out to my colleagues to give me questions, and this is one of their questions. So I wanted to just give us a little table, and thank you, Ms. Garmendia, for working with me on this to kind of explain that. So these are some of the numbers, and I think it's important that as we have this conversation, we realize what is an endowment, because honestly, $10 to $12 million is not necessarily a huge amount of money, and we need to be realistic about what this fund has the potential to bring in so that we're making our investment decisions wisely. But most important is just remember to capture that the annual amount will grow slowly over time. And how could the fund or the annual spending grow faster? Obviously, you could reinvest more of the interest. That is a clear strategy and a clear approach. And then also there's the idea of accepting outside contributions. This is an idea that, again, I look forward to talking with some of our panelists that we have here today about what that could look like. Fund management. So something that's really interesting to consider is to remember that because we are a municipality, we do have some rules and some restrictions that we would have to honor and some regulations to figure out what this would look like. Our treasurer has the authority to invest public funds, which is why I've invited Treasurer Lane to be a guest for us today, because certainly his influence and his thoughts on what we should do and where we should go would be key. And a non-city entity only under the following circumstances will have the opportunity to be a fund management. Again, I just think all of this information is important as we think about how we might set this fund up, who might manage it, how we might invest the funds, and what ideas we will be funding. And what guidance do we have from the city councilor? So I absolutely want to give a shout out to the city councilor's office. She has given us some feedback that we would continue to unpack and walked out. But one of the things that our city charter kind of makes clear is that the Board of Aldermen, kind of our limitations and where we are. And so the Board of Aldermen shall not have the power to appropriate any money for charitable purposes except such as shall be subject to the administration or supervision of the city. The Board of Aldermen is not prohibited from transferring money outside of the city so long as it is for the public purpose. However, it must determine the purpose of the expenditures and not delegate the power it is given in the city charter. So again, these are just things to really think through as we think about how this might look like. And this isn't unfamiliar. I served on the Board of Education, and so that is a great example of an entity that is, has municipal election power, but works with the foundation to kind of administer those funds. And that's part of why we've invited Dr. Adams from the St. Louis Community Foundation to be a part of today's panel to talk about what it might look like from that end. How can funds be spent? I think many of my colleagues and I, and perhaps many folks in the city, are very familiar with Paul Payne, who is our budget director, and he has given us a little advice, specifically cautioning against any specified use that might outgrow the projected trajectory of the earnings. Allow for a buffer. So obviously we want to be financially smart and financially intelligent, and we don't want to bite off more than we can chew per se. So we might want to consider capital costs that can be deferred if the money isn't available, personnel costs that are currently going at 3% per year. Director Paul Payne also recommends using the funds in a way that can get matching dollars for the procedures of operational savings, because that is one of the things that we have available to us. All right. And so next up, we have our panel today. I have kind of foreshadowed some of them, but absolutely want to thank them for joining us today. Our three panelists for our municipal endowment conversation include Treasurer Adam Lane, who I'm so excited to have for us today. For any folks who are watching from home, just want to give a reminder that our treasurer is essentially our city fund manager in many ways. And so certainly excited about anything he might have to add to this conversation. Again, I mentioned that Dr. Adams is also present with us today as a panelist. He works with the St. Louis Community Foundation, which could be an option to explore for what this conversation looks like. And then we also have invited President and CEO, Mr. Neil Richardson of the St. Louis Development Corporation, because they have done some work that might be the most, as far as local options that match up what we might be thinking for municipal endowment funds. Something that they have actually already launched might be the closest example of what we have to look like. But at this point, I will ask for each of the panelists to kind of introduce themselves and share anything before we begin to dive into questions.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. I can go first and quickly again. Adam Lane, Treasurer for the City of St. Louis, who manage the investments for the city, currently sitting at about 700 million, a little north of 750 million for our managed investments. And we also have fund managers as well. So two investment firms that provide this service to us. If you need to see those reports, they're on the SGL Treasurer site. And then we also have another about 400 million that's in our local banks. And thank you all for the invite tonight, and love the presentation and all the work that's gone into this to make this an intentional process.
And then I'll introduce myself next. I'm Neil Richardson, President and CEO of the St. Louis Development Corporation. Chairwoman Sanye, thank you for the invitation to participate in this very important discussion for the future of the city of St. Louis, and very excited to speak before the committee of the whole this evening. As the head of St. Louis Development Corporation, we are a quasi-public agency, 501c4, governed by a separate board with ex officio seats. The chair is appointed by Mayor Jones. And then the chair of the budget committee, which is Alderwoman Kara Spencer, has a seat on the SLDC Board of Directors, as well as the chair of the HUD's committee, which is Alder Lady Shamik Covered within her title. Also has a seat within the SLDC Board of Directors. So we work very closely with the Board of Aldermen, but we have our own powers as a separate board to be able to invest dollars. We have the privilege of now fully obligated all of the funds that have been allocated to SLDC through the American Rescue Plan Act of $109 million, and through our overall strategy in partnership with the board of aldermen and the mayor's office, the development of the economic justice action plan that has really strategically aligned around 286 million of the almost $500 million of the ARPA funds that have been received by the city of St. Louis to really be focused on ensuring that we build a more resilient, robust economy where we can recover not just from COVID, also set ourselves up for a great success in the future, and had the privilege to partner with Miss Elizabeth George. I won't steal too much of your thunder, at the St. Louis Community Foundation to establish the Economic Development and Transformation Fund to align and coordinate that capital that we've been put within our stewardship of SLDC to ensure that we're not only making smart investments into the businesses and residents of the city of St. Louis, but also ensuring that we are providing opportunities and a clear vision and a pathway for our philanthropic and private funders to come alongside with us to accelerate and leverage this opportunity to make an impact in the city. So with that, I'll yield my time. Thank you.
Thank you. And also, I know I said Dr. Adams, but it is Elizabeth George who will be here representing the St. Louis Community Foundation. And I just wanted to make sure she was clear that she can go ahead and introduce herself now.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Elizabeth George. I'm the Director of Community Investment at the St. Louis Community Foundation. Thank you for having us this evening. We're very excited to be part of this conversation. The St. Louis Community Foundation is a 501c3 nonprofit organization. Our mission is to inspire purposeful philanthropy that connects community to donors to build and preserve a more equitable and vibrant region. We have about $525 million in assets. The majority of those are held in donor advised funds, but we do have about $115 million in endowment, and we made about $85 million in grants in 2023.
Thank you so much, Ms. George. I certainly appreciate you making yourself available. And I think someone with your specific role is very germane to this conversation. So I'm excited that you could be joining us today.
Happy to be here.
So to get us started, I have just some general questions for everyone to respond to. And with any of these questions, even if it's not directly relegated to you, if you have any relevant information or anything that you want to share, just feel free to chime in after that person. I think for me, it was kind of hard putting together these questions, and I bet the president's office feels similarly working together on this because you all really have such institutional central information to what this could look like. So I'm sure that there's overlapping questions that you all can respond to. But for starters, are there any examples or models for a municipal endowment fund that you would suggest that the Board of Aldermen consider as we, give the highest consideration to the idea of this municipal endowment fund? And perhaps we can just start in the order in which we started. And so Treasurer Lane, if you want to lead us in answering that.
Sure. So I'll answer indirectly just so someone said I didn't answer the question. But to your point of, or to your question of other examples, I don't have any specific ones, but I know in following this and having conversations with members of the board and board adjacent, one of the things that I've looked out for and suggested is making sure that purpose drives it. So not just what is it going to be spent on, because even if we look at all those categories, let's say this, we want this fund to go ideally in perpetuity. Once maybe that is no longer a priority or as new priorities emerge, the ability to be nimble with how we're directing funds with this is going to be important. So I would say whatever is established and whatever route we decide to go in with a partnership with moving forward with any type of endowment fund, everyone figuring out what is the purpose, because that purpose is going to drive how those funds are managed, how those funds are spent down, and who are the decision makers around that in a sustainable way, in a way that doesn't have us being confused later or wondering if we can make certain decisions or if we can pivot. So something that is flexible, but also sustainable and purpose driven, I would say, and goal oriented.
And then I'll just kind of piggyback off of what Treasurer Lane mentioned. So what other cities are doing is they're aligning their public funding with other philanthropic and private sector funding. Detroit, Charlotte, Chicago, and Pittsburgh are really four that come to the top of mind. Detroit specifically through their Strategic Neighborhood Fund, really being able to align some of their public resources and their philanthropic community to be able to accelerate economic development and economic growth within their city. Because there's some dollars, as we all know, that we receive as a city through ARPA, for example, that we are restricted on how we can leverage those dollars and where we can utilize those funds. We don't have as much flexibility, but where the foundation and the other private sector really allows us to do is to fill those other gaps within the marketplace and really be able to not just see projects and pilot a project, but to sustain it long term. And so that's really been a strong opportunity through partnerships with philanthropic and public sector entities across the country. Also, Charlotte has a racial equity initiative. Chicago, there's Invest Southwest. And then in Pittsburgh, there's Corridors of Opportunity. So those are all examples of cities that have really been thoughtful around aligning and coordinating public dollars with philanthropic dollars to be able to accelerate growth. And they've been spent across a myriad of different type of investments, from planning to streetscape, supporting and strengthening CDCs, real estate development, and establishment of like revolving loan funds. I heard that as an example earlier, and business lending and other grant opportunities. So just wanted to throw that out as just a couple examples of maybe not endowment specifically, but how the public sector and the philanthropic community partner together to drive equitable economic growth in those similar cities.
Neil's got it just right, is that there's what we have seen with a number of other community foundations across the country is that they may have the cities may have a fund at the community foundation that is there to align philanthropic dollars with public dollars to allow that public-private partnership to take place in some unique and different ways. And oftentimes those funds are, well, not oftentimes, they always are, as Treasurer Lane discussed, really purposeful around what the city has identified as key priority areas, and then how the philanthropic sector can support that. And that generally is through a pooled process. So it's not just the community foundation that is contributing. It is it's there to help pool dollars from other individual donors, other foundations, other sources of funding coming in to support that. So I'll use Atlanta as an example, where the Community Foundation of Greater Atlanta has worked with the city on a number of different funds, primarily around geographic areas, three specific neighborhoods that the city and the Community Foundation have come together to truly target some investment, and they've been able to pull in national funding to support that as well. So others, I know the Baltimore Community Foundation has a municipal fund, the Central Indiana, Milwaukee, Detroit, as was said earlier, a number of different community foundations have city funds, though I'm not sure how many have actual endowment funds.
Thank you all. I've already learned so much. So hopefully our folks who are listening and tuning in feel similarly. Treasurer Lane, I'm going to switch to you. You currently manage the city's funds. How do you envision the management of a municipal endowment fund?
Yes, so I can speak to how we do fund management and how it works at the city, which can be a a process that not a lot of people are clued into, and why an endowment fund through the foundation might be a better option. But again, it depends on what the goals of the city and this group are. So from our standpoint, most of we, have investment accounts. We have a very strict investment guideline per state policy. So we don't have a lot of sexy investments, no crypto, no E-Trade, nothing like that. But most of it is, treasuries, which historically have not been exciting and not high yielding. But because of the latest high interest rate environment, we've actually been able to see great returns on our relatively simple investments to the tune of 5 and 6%, which is great. So those numbers that you provided earlier, if we're looking at this fund, and we did some calculations as well, even on a modest end, we could see, a 4.5% return in this current environment, just on our the simple securities that we use. So the treasuries and other things that we're allowed to invest in, which is again that 11 million. And if rates, which are going to trend down in the market that we're in, even if we go down to about 3%, we're seeing 7.5 million a year, and even at the lowest at about a 1.5%, 3.7 million. So obviously it does dip off, and I don't think it's going to be a while until treasury rates are down in the ones. If you're looking to buy a house, you're hoping that happens faster, but it's going to be a little while for that. So we do see this as a promising environment. However, when if you have different guidelines or less strict guidelines, like a foundation does have on its investment policy, and I'll let Ms. George speak to that, there are higher opportunities for or other opportunities for potential return. So how it's managed on our end, I said we had two fund managers. So we have our accounts, we ladder it out. We might ladder out an investment, which just means that we know it's going to expire at a certain time. So we'll just re-roll it over, so roll over that investment. And the purpose of our investment accounts right now is for it to grow, and any interest that we have is booked to general revenue. So any earnings that we have on a year-to-year basis in our investment portfolio, that is booked to general revenue, which is a consideration that, again, does speak to the benefit of an endowment fund, because we would have to then change how that interest is used, or how we account for that interest. So we wouldn't be able to book it to general revenue. We would actually need to have a different appropriation process for it, which can be a little bit more cumbersome, because right now, again, just goes to general revenue. And then it's in the account. We have quarterly reviews, which anyone in the public can view, and then we post that on our site. Again, another thing, that if it were managed, depending on who the decision makers are, we would have to set that up. And in your presentation earlier, it did say that, the Board of Aldermen are not allowed to make appropriations for charitable causes. So that would have to be something to figure out, okay, who is making this appropriation, and how's that going? So there would be a little bit more to figure out when it comes to spending, because right now we don't spend any of the interest earnings.
Thank you, Treasurer Lane. I think that's important, just to give context to some folks who might be tuning in and wondering why we might be talking about a foundation rather than the treasurer, since the treasurer's office is currently the city managed fund. So thank you so much for elaborating on that.
Yeah, and if I could add one more thing, Madam Chair, Elizabeth also brought up a great point. When you think about an endowment fund, just as opposed to just an investment fund at the city, when you have an endowment, as President and CEO Richardson also said, you want to see how we can get public-private partnerships. You want people to invest, and you can actually give to a city and that be tax deductible. There are a little bit more hoops involved, but most people are used to giving a 501c3. You get your donation letter. So encouraging private partnerships and private donations to build that fund is going to help it be more sustainable and grow. And that happens more easily through a municipal foundation and a foundation, because they have people working full time to grow these funds. And whereas we don't necessarily have that at a city through our funds, our invested funds.
Thank you so much. I'm going to switch up our order a little bit. I think, Ms. George, if you don't mind following up and talking about a little bit how the city could partner with the foundation, like the St. Louis Community Foundation, to establish the Municipal Endowment Fund.
Sure. So if the city chose to establish an endowment fund with the St. Louis Community Foundation, we'd start with a couple of key decisions that would need to be made. First, the purpose for the endowment or the intention of for use of the endowment, the proceeds off the endowment. That is my understanding, the general work of the committee of the whole. So that would come from the deciding bodies, right? And then secondly, we would work with you to determine, probably Treasurer Lane, to determine what the growth targets for the endowment would be, and from there, how we would structure the asset allocations to meet those targets. So we do have some more conservative or less risky options. We have some riskier options. I would suggest that we are not an institution that goes to full risk. And so we also will not be buying Bitcoins with invested dollars with us. We work with 5 trustee banks. So the city would have the option to choose among those 5 banks who you would feel most comfortable with for where to service the trustee bank on the endowment. And one other decision that I'm going to sort of throw a little not wrench, but a little excitement into the conversation is that most endowments do live in perpetuity, and that's what we've been talking about as you look at those dollars that you were showing at 1 year, 10 years, 20 years. Some organizations will choose to sunset after, say, 25 years or 30 years or 50 years. So another option would be to say, we're not going to endow in perpetuity. We're going to talk about what the needs we see for the next 30 years or the next 50 years are for these funds and plan on sunsetting them over time. That would be another decision point that the city would need to make. It gives you the ability to grow, to use additional dollars, but also for those folks who say, hey, we want to see what the results will be for the use of these funds in our lifetimes. The other thing that we do with the majority of our funds that are not donor advised funds is we seat an advisory committee that helps drive the decision making. Although our board does hold final authority. So President CEO Richardson can talk a lot about the advisory committees that we work with, but any advisory committee would be designed in conjunction with the entity that originates the fund. So in this case, with the city, and would likely have representation from the city. But also representation from the St. Louis Community Foundation in terms of both staff and board. We also highly recommend community members on these kinds of advisory committees so that that community engagement remains a part of the decision making. Let's see. So that's the general structure that we would give to a municipal endowment fund.
And Chairwoman Sonia, if it's okay, I would like to add some additional context to Ms. George.
Absolutely. You can certainly add additional context. And then I was just going to ask you next to describe the Economic Transformation Fund and how it was established in your role, but you can tie that.
No, perfect. No, that's exactly right. So as we get SODC receive proceeds from the American Rescue Plan Act as a subrecipient, as a recipient in the program, we identified that the funding and the opportunity and the impact that we're aiming to drive, the $112 million in our stewardship, is not sufficient to address this significant amount of challenges that we are up against. One example is the small business and nonprofit fund that we're supporting for North City businesses, in which we received almost 700 applications and about $1 billion in requests. Just for one program, the funding that we had available to address the need. It will require not just public dollars, but also philanthropic and private dollars aligned and coordinated towards those programs that we're standing up to support the need. And so as we were exploring partnerships with philanthropic institutions, as SODC is not a 501c3, but a 501c4, we reached out to the St. Louis Community Foundation about establishing a fund to manage the philanthropic proceeds that we receive. And so one of the first investments that we took in was through MasterCard, through their Digital Doors program, $1 million commitment to support and align the efforts that we were doing at the Northside Economic Empowerment Center to support small businesses with technical assistance and help them build an e-commerce and online presence. And through this partnership, we had to create the purpose of the fund, which is really centered around supporting economic development activity that will empower, develop, and transform the city of St. Louis to a more vibrant, just, and growing economy where all people can thrive, as also outlined within the Economic Justice Action Plan. But then also establishing an advisory committee that's made up of CDA, SODC, the mayor's office, and then also philanthropic partners, major foundations, and then also community members. So we have members from neighborhood organizations, we have small developers, we have entrepreneurs, individuals who provide technical assistance for small businesses and nonprofits to help us as we're making decisions around not just how we raise the capital, but how do we allocate the capital in a way that aligns with the purpose in which the fund was established. And so that advisory committee meets on a regular basis. We have subcommittees that manage various aspects of the funds and the decisions and the strategy that we put together. But ultimately, as Elizabeth George spoke to, is the board of directors of the St. Louis Community Foundation have the final approval as those fundings goes out. So the advisory committee makes the recommendations to the board, then the board makes the final approval to disseminate those grants to the appropriate initiative or project that aligns with the public funding sources that are going out, as well as other private sources that may be put into the fund. I think the key aspect of this is that the ARPA funds, for example, are not commingled with the philanthropic funds or the private funds. This is about strategically aligning and coordinating dollars. So we don't put money into the same pot that the St. Louis Community Foundation, and then they disseminate it. That's not how it works. We have to do our own set of compliance and review for the federal proceeds that we receive and the public sources that we receive at SODC as a subrecipient. And then we also have to work with the foundation and the private institutions as they have their own set of requirements and review that they go through. But we do coordinate and align our investment strategies and initiatives. So that's just kind of a high level overview of how this process works. It takes a lot of coordination, a lot of time. And then we also was gracious to receive a $1.5 million commitment from the private sector as a grant to help us establish the operations for these meetings and bring on the appropriate partners and consultants to help us think through the right structure to these investments in this platform. So we are at a great place now where we are starting to roll out funding, but it takes some time to get these things established. But really excited, and it's really important though that we set that tone with the community foundation but allow them to really lead and guide the actual grant giving while giving them a direct vision and purpose that they can really utilize as a roadmap.
Thank you so much, Mr. Richardson. That's exactly what I was hoping that you would kind of dive into and talk about. I think it's interesting because I think we can already see the correlation and relationship between these entities. And again, I think that Economic Transformation Fund is the closest model we have in our region, in our city, of what this might look like. And I think a municipal endowment fund might involve some of those similar relationships and needings for guidance in different roles of the different entities. I wanted to circle back to Treasurer Lane. How would one direct the treasurer's office to change how the interest income is used? If you want us to talk about, I know we have a couple of things that are getting interest for us right now, but if you want to talk about maybe in general how you just foresee that possibly playing out, and it can be with your office independently, or it can be in relationship with any of the other entities represented here today.
Well, if we went the foundation route, or endowment fund route with the foundation, we wouldn't need to change anything. We would just continue with how the city books interest and generates interest income. If we didn't go that route and we wanted to hold that fund internally, that would be a process that we would go through with the Board of Aldermen and um, our other department leaders, so our city comptroller's office, as well as our budget director, because then again, it's, even when we put that, if we are able to put that interest income toward another fund, it would be then what is the process for appropriating? So who are the decision makers? How are those decision makers selected? Just having a process is the thing. So our thing is we have a process in place right now for how interest income is used. If we're going to change that, or if that's not going to allow us to appropriate the funds the way that we want to, just going over what the changes need to be in. I don't know if that's a board bill or just, well, understanding the process and then seeing if there's subsequent board bills that need to come from that.
Thank you. And maybe kind of alignment, kind of separate to that question. Mr. Richardson, could you just talk to us a little bit about how the Economic Transformation Fund was established and its purpose?
Yeah, so I think I laid out some of that in my introduction, but it was again really us reaching out to the St. Louis Community Foundation as we had some initial philanthropic funds that were looking to be aligned with the other ARPA initiatives that we were launching. And so as we established first the purpose of the fund, and then also I selected the advisory committee, working again very closely with Elizabeth George of helping her complete her new fund that had to be established for the purpose to receive any philanthropic resources that would be contributed to the St. Louis Community Foundation. So we had supported Elizabeth with completing that document to get that fund stood up and established. And now as we established the advisory committee, it's now upon us as the advisory committee and then also the city and our other private partners to go out and raise capital to support these initiatives long term. So that's how it was initially established, again through Elizabeth may have the right term of the document. I think it's a fund management agreement that we had to complete to really help it get established and then go from there. And again, this fund was not seeded at all by the ARPA resources. These are all separate philanthropic grant funds that are coming to align and be coordinated with ARPA proceeds and other funding that we receive from public dollars towards economic development and transformation. So I would definitely yield to Elizabeth around the proper name and terminology of the documents that they utilize to establish these funds. But that was in a nutshell how we've approached the conversation with Elizabeth and the St. Louis Community Foundation to get started.
Thank you, and that's a great time to yield. Perfect timing. Ms. George, you could totally elaborate on Mr. Richardson's point, but also if you could really talk a bit more about describing the amounts and types of funds that are typically managed by the St. Louis Community Foundation, and what are the services provided by you all to the donors of the funds?
So Thank you. And the proper title of the paperwork is the fund agreement. And that actually is the easiest part of establishing the fund, is filling out the paperwork, believe it or not. And the fund agreement sets out that purpose of the fund and is absolutely central to the work of the St. Louis Community Foundation. We live and die by community need and donor intent. And so getting the language of that purpose down is very important and would be something that for an endowment fund, we are incredibly careful about how those are worded, because if an endowment fund is going into perpetuity, you want to make sure that you have given yourself the direction that you need going forward, as well as the flexibility within that direction, because what we need today may be very, very different than what we need 50 years from now or 100 years from now. So anyway, as mentioned earlier, the Community Foundation holds about 800 funds, totaling about $525 million. The majority of those are donor advised funds, and we're currently holding about $115 million in endowment. Most of those are designated for a particular use. Some are very narrow in that use. Some give us much more discretion, and that's where we are able to make a number of grants that we are able to make the determination of where those grants go, as opposed to being directed by donor intent. When we think about the services that we hold, one, as I mentioned, it's making sure that everything that we do as we move forward meets the purpose of that fund. So with the advisory committee for a fund, we would call this a field of interest fund, or a field of interest endowed fund. For that, we would start with the strategy sessions around what are the desired outcomes. So you can set what that purpose is, but then what are the specific outcomes? What's that impact that we want the funds to have as we go forward? And then think about the process for fund distribution. We will help manage and facilitate those conversations. We'll talk about community engagement. We believe strongly that you do with, not for. You mentioned that earlier in your opening remarks. And so we'd want to make sure that at some level there is community engagement, whether it's only through the advisory committee or whether we have other methods of going out into community to hear what to have feedback and input from the people who live in the city and are being impacted by the use of these funds. We have a full range of grant making services, everything from we can help develop requests for proposals, we can make them available to a targeted list, or we can open that up through to an open call, and we will help give counsel to when you might want to use one process, a targeted versus an open call, with anywhere between, say, $6 and $10 million a year to play with. You might be doing a couple of different kinds of processes over the course of the year. We take in grant applications. Our staff preps for decision making. We prep the materials for the advisory committee to be able to review and make their recommendations. We manage the grant distributions. We ensure that the reporting takes place, and we can work with the city or whatever sort of governing body from the city's standpoint. We're the governing body, but from the city's standpoint, to make sure that the communication is getting back out to community as to how the dollars were used and what the impact and outcomes of those dollars have been. So that's sort of the scope of how we would work with you all to make sure that that purpose, the decisions that this body will make as to how those funds are used, really is upheld and honored in getting those grant dollars out the door.
Thank you all so much. We're getting to the end of the near of our time. So before I ask you all our final wrap-up question, if any of my colleagues have questions that you would like to ask, I know we discussed you all kind of not getting a chance to ask questions, but if any of you all do have questions, I definitely want to be the kind of chair who hears from you all. So if you could raise your hand, and I see President Green, so we'll start with her, and then any other alders who have questions, just raise your hand and I will make sure we get to you next. President Green?
Thank you so much. I found this very informative tonight. There's two quick questions that I have, just so I'm making sure I'm understanding this in my brain. If we were to set something up through the community foundation, is there then commingling of funds? So if we solicited more funds into it to grow a bigger endowment, is that what happens, or does it still stay, this is all the public money in one fund and then there's another, fund attached to it? I'm just trying to figure out, for the purposes of growing an endowment, can we put, additional private resources into something to help grow it?
Yes, you can. So we would start with the funds from the city, and then anybody can contribute to a fund as you wish or as they wish.
Okay. And then my second question is, are there best practices in the minimum amount of money that we should have to form an endowment?
I would suggest that what you would want to be thinking about is how much you want to be able to give out per year. And I mean, we have some very, very small endowments, and we have some very, very large endowments that we manage. And thinking that typically it's 4.5% to 5% that gets granted out to do anything meaningful. You'll want to be right sizing the amount of money that you're putting in.
Okay, because 10 to 12 million a year from interest does not seem like a whole lot of money, unless we are able to create a larger endowment.
Correct, and as Ms. Garmendia showed us earlier, though, that over the course of what was it, 15 years or 20 years, you will have given out $250 million and still have something like $300 million in endowment if nobody else contributed any additional funds. So it's that you do less now, but over time you're able to do significantly more.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you, Madam Green. Alderman Narayan from the 4th Ward.
Thank you, Chairwoman and members of the committee. I have a question. I'm not sure if the treasurer would be the appropriate person to answer, or who. I guess I'm going to slightly disagree with the president that $10 or $12 million isn't a lot of money each year. I think that when we look at giving employees raises, that across the board, that $10 or $12 million would go a really long way towards hiring and retaining a vibrant workforce here in the city. I don't think it's news to anyone that that's what I've been advocating for. But when it comes to kind of staying nimble with this endowment, if we were to throw the lion's share of this money into an endowment, would there be a way to say that in the future, if say 2/3 or 3/4 or 9/10 of the Board of Aldermen wanted to change things somehow, and to pull the money out of the endowment and utilize it for something different, is there a way that we can legislatively set that that threshold so that it's not just a simple majority? We don't just do an endowment and then the 5 years from now, a group of people says, "Oh, actually, we would like to give everyone $1,000 a piece or whatever." What does that look like in trying to set up the framework there to guarantee long-term success with this, and to set the bar a little bit higher so that there had to be a majority of aldermen who really wanted to make this change. I do think it's important that we stay nimble. We've seen some pretty unprecedented times, even in the time that I've been here. So I don't want to tie the hands of future generations of the Board of Aldermen, but I also don't want to make it easy for them to take the money and do something else with it.
So one thing to be clear about is once that endowment is structured at the St. Louis Community Foundation, and my guess would be with any other 501c3 foundation or otherwise that where you would place it, that those funds legally are the funds of the St. Louis Community Foundation. If the future boards of alder people wish to change the purpose, again, there would be an advisory committee that they would need to go through. They would, and any of those kinds of changes would need to go up through our board of directors. And there have been times when endowment purposes have been changed, and it's usually because the need has changed or because the purpose statement was written so narrowly that it did not give any flexibility in how those funds could be used.
So just to be clear there, just so I'm understanding. So if we were to put the whole of this into an endowment, and 5 years from now, 10 years from now, had some major issue, the city would not be able to recoup those funds.
So if there were a major issue and the city wanted to recoup the funds, it would need to go through a process. And again, I am not an attorney, and so I'm going to be anything I say at this point is with a little bit of a
Sure.
yeah, that our legal counsel would need to really be able to weigh in on that, right? But there is a process called a cypre process where endowments may be lifted. There typically needs to be some pretty significant reasons as to why you are lifting the endowment. So it has happened, not frequently, and it's not something that we take lightly. That there would definitely need to be some discussion and
So ultimately, it may not be in the legislative body of the city of St. Louis's purview what to do with the city of St. Louis's money if it went into an endowment with you guys.
and probably with any other anyone else who holds an endowment. I can't speak for everyone, but that's typically how endowment works. And again, if there would be an advisory committee that would be made up of people from the city, probably from the Board of Aldermen. It would include we would have to structure who was sitting on that advisory committee, but
could the
yes,
advisory committee be the Board of Aldermen?
It could be. I would suggest that you may not want it only to be members of the Board of Aldermen, because then you're getting into that, you've got some provisions in your work world that we heard earlier, that you can't give to 501c3 charities. So, we would probably recommend a broader committee that had some other voices in there as well, but certainly seats on that committee, yes.
Well, thank you so much for your time and your answers, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Orion. Alderwoman Schweitzer has some questions, but this is one of those times where we had collaborative government, and Alderman Orion actually asked the questions that Alderwoman Schweitzer had. Alderwoman Schweitzer is our H2O advocate, so I'm sure she's certainly happy to see the results that number one was water main infrastructure investment. But we'll circle back to that. President Green, did you have an additional question before we go to the next portion of our meeting?
One quick question that hoping that Treasurer Lane can answer. If not, this might be a comptroller question, and I can follow up with her. But just would we be able to use an endowment as collateral to be able to do additional bonding for the city?
Yeah, so that could be a question that the comptroller could better answer, but I can provide some insight into that. So it depends how we note the funds. So it depends on what account we put it into and how we account for that funding, whether or not we could use it for additional bonding. But again, even, whether it's at the city or whether it's at an endowment fund, well, if it's at an endowment fund, we wouldn't be able to, but whether it's here with or with the endowment, the key thing is like, what are the goals and what are the sources and uses of those funds? And that'll dictate what we are and are not allowed to do.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you so much to our panelists. This is me giving you all a round of applause. I know that this is a very new idea for our city, and I love for our city to be the trailblazer that we are. So I just want to thank all of you all. You all, happily accepted this invitation, and I have a feeling that this is our first time doing this, but certainly not the last time. So just thank you all for coming. And if there was any final comments that you wanted to give about this idea or the process, I want to give you the floor to do that before we move on to our next portion. And so we'll start with Treasurer Lane.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for the invite. Thank you for members of the committee as a whole and my fellow panelists. I think this is great. I think just having these conversations, again, involving the public, making sure their voice is heard is a great thing. I've been on the doors in the neighborhood meetings and everyone is talking about this. The city is excited. And the city is hopeful for what can happen with this $250 million. And very appreciative of the intentionality that this group is putting forth and others in the city to see how this can make the city that we know it can be. So just thank you for allowing me in my office to be a thought partner and be part of the solution.
Thank you, Ms. George.
And I will echo the thanks for including the St. Louis Community Foundation on this panel. We are excited about the partnerships we've built with the city over the last several years, and excited to just be part of the conversation about the use of the funds. While I have presented from the standpoint of the St. Louis Community Foundation, I do think that thinking about how these funds can be leveraged over time, how they can be used in a public-private partnership, whether with the St. Louis Community Foundation or elsewhere, I think is really exciting. Not just that we would be the trailblazers, but that we would really be putting the future of St. Louis, of the city of St. Louis, at the forefront, and really thinking about how best this windfall can be used to truly make a difference in the city we all love. So thank you for the invitation.
President and CEO Richardson.
Yeah, thank you.
Wait up, calling you.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity to be present today. And for St. Louis Development Corporation to be part of this conversation. I want to echo all of Treasurer Lane's statements as well as Elizabeth's statements about the need to invest these dollars long term into the future of our city and the future generations. And it's really important, I think, as we established initially this partnership between SLDC and the St. Louis Community Foundation about not just giving individual constituents the opportunity to provide feedback around what they would like to see, but also providing them the opportunity to invest into the future of St. Louis. And so as we think about this partnership that we've established with the St. Louis Community Foundation, it's allowed other stakeholders in the private and the philanthropic sector to help us advise and inform us of the best strategies, best practices around how we actually invest those dollars and make some decisions around how those dollars are raised and are invested. And then also providing opportunities for the private sector and the philanthropic community to actually give dollars and resources to advance their city forward. Obviously, we're not as a city agency and as a city itself is not able to receive these proceeds directly. So being able to have vehicles for others to participate in the long-term success of our city is greatly important. And the St. Louis Community Foundation has been a tremendous partner with SLDC and the city of St. Louis through our effort through the Economic Development and Transformation Fund. So I just wanted to make sure that that was stated, and then also that I'm really pleased with the engagement process associated with how we can bring people into the fold and really elevating their needs for investment in our city and the future growth of it. So again, thank you for the time and the opportunity this evening, Chairwoman Sanye and the committee as a whole.
Thank you so much for you all again, just for coming and engaging. This conversation was so great. You know, you never know how these things are going to go the first time that you do them, but I don't think it could have went better. I think we all learned a lot. As you all mentioned, I think this is something that the city is extremely excited about, and especially there's a lot of mention of this being a chance to be transformative for generations to come. And so it's certainly an honor for me to facilitate this conversation as the youngest alderperson and with someone who has the opportunity to potentially be here for many years. So just thank you all. I'm going to transition into our next portion of our meeting. Our next portion of our meeting will be Ms. Milberg, who is the policy director for the mayor's office. Again, Ms. Milberg and the mayor's office has been very much in support of this idea of the municipal endowment from the very beginning. The mayor has given clear conversations. I got to attend her cabinet and conversation meeting, and she was very clear at that time that, you know, this is an idea that she fully supports and would like to see move forward. And so we've invited Ms. Milgram to come here today to talk to us about her thoughts around the Municipal Endowment Fund, but also our next agenda item of the Convention Center. And so I just want to thank Ms. Milberg for coming today and welcome her to share any comments or thoughts that she might have.
Sure. So first of all, thank you so much, Chair Sanye, for that very gracious welcome. And also thank you, President Green and your staff, all the board members and their staff tonight for just having the focus of tonight's meeting be such a truly thoughtful and insightful discussion of the idea of what a municipal endowment fund is, and really turning over so many stones tonight in such a really impactful way. And thank you also to Treasurer Lane, Elizabeth George, and Neil Richardson for all their generosity of time and insight tonight. The idea of the municipal endowment fund is one the mayor, has felt extremely passionately about from the get-go. Certainly has not been shy about bringing it up anytime anybody mentions the RAM settlement funds, and that has resulted in a lot of really wonderful conversations with folks in the community, both through neighborhood and organizational meetings, as well as many individual alders who we've had chats with over the past few months, all of whom are really excited about this idea for its potential to be really transformative for the city in a way that not a lot of other cities are positioned to benefit from. And we even get questions from Jefferson City, from non-St. Louis area representatives and senators asking us, what are you going to do with these funds? What are you going to do with these funds? So a lot of eyes are on the city of St. Louis and watching us as an example for how we're going to position ourselves to use these and invest these. And I think a lot of that has really been rooted in what a unique opportunity this is. We've heard a lot tonight about how there aren't a ton of clear examples about how municipal endowment funds have worked, right? I know in the meetings that Christina Garmendia and I have had, she's mentioned, that keeps on coming up, which is there's not a clear framework of exactly what the city of St. Louis is working through right now. And it really stands out that, this is a really unique time for the city to position itself in a way that can be examples to other cities. And that, in 5, 10, 15 years from now, a fund like this can be the but-for change agent for vital projects that otherwise might not have the capacity or the opportunity to get this boosted investment, no matter what those look like. So really exciting time. We're grateful for such a fantastically curated conversation tonight. And, we're mindful of what a gift this is and what an opportunity a fund like this could be as we look at the broader financial landscape. It's no secret that, we're continuing to engage with folks in Jefferson City on various proposals, gaining some momentum about what to do with the earnings tax. We know it's a huge source of our general fund, about 37%. It's a critical source of funding for public safety and other, critical city services. So to have that little bit of uncertainty in those conversations and the potential of what those could do happening at the same time that, there's this thoughtful engagement about how to position the city long term in a way that if something, were to happen in Jeff City that really does impact our earnings tax revenue, that, this is a source of long-term funding that we could be looking to for so many different purposes. So just thank you to everyone here for making space for this conversation and for the conversations that will be coming on this. So switching over to the other mentioned topic of long-term funding, one of the topics that has emerged as well, it has been a continuous topic of interest, but that has emerged more recently amongst us something else to consider making space for in this conversation about what to do with the funds or the investments on them more specifically is the convention center. We know that, the convention center is one of those sources of multifaceted, economic returns and revenue returns for our city. We continue to see as a city really elevated interest in hosting conventions here. This impacts our service and hotel workers, its jobs, its, of course, of everybody from event laborers, electricians, the folks who set up these events and take them down, who do food service for these. It's our restaurant and bar industry, our cultural and arts community. It's getting people out and about in our city. And yes, also the tax revenue that comes from all of that, right? So we're very excited that space has been made for considering this conversation, learning a little bit more about, the continued investment that the convention center needs, which is no secret. We know that some of the delayed funding that started with the county council's delays a few years ago has really been impactful as we've moved forward as a city with trying to find ways to shore this up. That's certainly been extremely frustrating. We're not going to shy away from that, but we're also not going to shy away from trying to find ways to continue to support this project as the need for it continues to be demonstrated. So I'm certainly not as big of an expert on this as Kitty Radcliffe is. So Chair Saunier, I will turn it over to you for facilitating further conversation.
Thank you, Ms. Milgram, so much for coming. Certainly, as I illustrated earlier, I really appreciate just the mayor being very direct and clear about what she would like to see and what next steps. And I'm always grateful when city leaders agree. I think we always have to highlight those emphases and put them in the spotlight, because certainly the media focuses on those instances of disagreement. But I'm glad that we all seem to have consensus around centering how we can really have a sustainable, long-term, transformative fund for our city and position generations to come to be successful and hopefully not be discussing the same challenges and issues that we are today. So thank you so much for that. With that, I want to, first of all, our next speaker, Ms. Ratcliffe, I'm so excited for you to be here today. Even though this is the last item on our agenda, we certainly have saved the best for last. And so I just really want to make sure that you get a warm welcome from me for coming here and for attending today. And then I also just want to make sure the intentions are clear with this conversation. The reason why Committee of the Whole was formed and why it took place is because from the very beginning, I think there was a genuine interest to make sure that we have a very transparent, public, inclusive process. And Committee of the Whole gives us an opportunity to do that, where every branch of government and every single one of us as city leaders are involved in these conversations, where we're all getting the same information at the same time, and we all have the ability to ask questions. I think that's incredibly important. Again, as I mentioned earlier, the media and other places for information are not the most reliable. They're not the most fact-checked, and sometimes can be contentious, and not even necessarily because there's real tensions there, but just because there's different intentions. And so I really wanted to invite Ms. Ratcliffe here today to talk about the convention center, since it has been conversations, and I believe there is an ask there. My ask to Ms. Ratcliffe was, can you come bring us some factual information about what the needs are of the convention center? Can you talk about the impacts and the benefits of the convention center? And could you allow an opportunity for each of my colleagues to weigh in and ask their questions or give their commentary, because that is what this process is for and is about. So I just really want to thank Ms. Ratcliffe for accepting this invitation and make sure it's clear to the public and everyone on the call what the intentions are of this conversation. So we're not necessarily, as a full Board of Aldermen collectively, giving our feedback today or taking any sort of votes on whether or not we're in opposition or we're in support, but we are hoping to, as individuals, be able to weigh in a public and transparent process and make sure that we're having a conversation that's centered on facts rather than hearsay. And with that, Ms. Ratcliffe, again, just a warm welcome to you, and would love for you to just introduce yourself.
Oh, thank you so much, Chairwoman Saunier. I very much appreciate the opportunity to give you and the Committee of the Whole an update on your convention center project. I also like to introduce Craig Lucas, who you can see on the screen there. Craig is the program manager from Kwame Building Group, so he'll be available kind of at the end when we get to any questions that you may have. I would like to share my screen. I'll try not to do death by PowerPoint here.
Absolutely.
There we go. Everybody see that all right? Terrific. Thank you. So we call this project AC Next Gen, the America's Center, Next Generation, and the Future of St. Louis Meetings. This organization, the Convention Center, is owned by the City of St. Louis. You charge us with operating it. We don't get paid a management fee, and you don't cover the operating deficit. We do it because it's good for the community, and the community impact is year-round. This is an entity which helps bring people. It activates the streets. It brings new money in. It supports jobs for our citizens. It creates very positive perceptions. We've got more than 90% of people that, when we survey them here for events at America's Center, say that they're leaving St. Louis with a better impression of St. Louis than they had when they came. And we do create very positive impressions of our community. And then we create ambassadors who go home and say, you know what? We saw that stuff in the media about public safety. I had a great experience there. And the people are warm and friendly and welcoming. They have a great community. This is something that is critically important as a part of the region's economy and revenue and different aspects for the city. I just wanted to give you an example, because I think that there's probably a misunderstanding. A lot of people don't really come to the convention center in St. Louis unless they're coming for a public ticketed event, like a Monster Jam or an auto show or something like that. But this is a list of the largest meetings that we had in the convention center in 2023. These are just about the top 25 or so of those. And they're largest because they're ranked by room nights, meaning people that are coming in from out of town, staying in hotels, and spending a whole lot of money while they're here. And you can see the economic impact that's coming in. This is direct spending when these groups come in. And it's not one size fits all. We have a great mix of business that comes into St. Louis that we're able to do because of the type of facility that we have. You can see religious groups, we've got national associations, we've got educational groups, we have corporate meetings, and we have amateur sports events. And it's a nice mix that is a year-round contribution to the economy of our community, putting people to work, activating our streets, and supporting the businesses that are here. I want to just give you a little bit of a background on the construction timeline of America Center. In 1977, the convention center opened as Cervantes Convention Center, and in 1993, the one and only expansion of that facility was completed. And then in 2013, we completed a renovation of some of the mechanical equipment, escalators and elevators and coolers and chillers, as well as some aesthetic improvements, making it a more friendly place than it was when it was originally built, with seating areas and artwork, and bringing St. Louis into the convention center for the time that they're here. But truly, there hasn't been any kind of a major expansion or improvement to the structure of the place in 30 years. Yet despite that, we are successful. You saw the list of the conventions that we had in here last year. It's not because we have the prettiest building, the newest building, the shiniest building, that we won having the best convention center in the Midwest in 2022. We were the Gold Award winner for America Center on a national basis. And it's also because we have a great team, our Explore St. Louis team, and the partners that we have in the hotels. We work really hard, the building operations side and the Explore St. Louis sales and marketing team, to make sure that the experience that people have when they come here is the best we can possibly make it. And when they do that, they overlook cracked floors and things that maybe aren't the newest and shiniest. And that's why we get to that percentage of 90% of the people who come here say they would come back and they would recommend coming back. So we have a great city. We have a great product. We just need to work on making it a little bit better, because 30 years is too long to be able to compete with cities like this. Because every city that we compete against has made or is in the process of making a significant investment in their convention facility. Just giving you that example, I know it's hard to see on the screen, Indianapolis. The Indianapolis Convention Center, the original convention center, was built around the same time as our original convention center. They are on their 6th expansion right now. And you'll hear in the neighborhood, in the community, you'll hear people say, like, well, how come we can't compete against Indianapolis? The fact of the matter is, when I started in the business, which was a very long time ago, we used to refer to Indianapolis as Indianoplace. And pretty much everyone I knew in the business referred to it as Indianoplace. But they have made continued significant investments in the product that they offer. The same can be said for Denver. Denver's convention center, the Colorado Convention Center, actually opened in 1990. I was director of sales and marketing for their largest hotel in downtown Denver at the time that it opened, which is why I remembered the date so clearly, because I went to the opening party in June of 1990, and they have just finished their 3rd expansion. With the new Wisconsin Center in Milwaukee is opening this year. The Music City Center in Nashville, they built a brand new convention center and opened it less than a decade ago, and they're currently studying an expansion on it. And Oklahoma City built a new building. And Seattle, which I'm not sure you can actually see this, it might be cut off at the bottom. Oh no, there it is there. Seattle just invested $2 billion in their convention center. So that's what we're up against when we are outbidding St. Louis against Milwaukee or Fort Lauderdale or Nashville or Denver or Oklahoma City or some of these other cities that you see. And pretty much everybody that we're up against has made the investment. So it's time, and it's past time. Quite frankly, we got sidetracked on doing this because of the Rams negotiation. We had a lease with the Rams that required that first tier obligation, and we started working on that in 2010. And it took about 4 years of our time to do that. And then the next step was to look at trying to figure out how to build a new facility for them. And that took a couple more years. So by the time we were able to turn the community attention to this, it was 2018. And in December of 2018, the Board of Aldermen passed the ordinance to fund half of the cost of a $210 million expansion and improvement to America Center. And 4 months after that, the county council did the same thing. And it was really an amazing effort to have a community investment that was regional for a regional asset, with the city funding half and the county funding half. Unfortunately, some things got in the way of being able to issue the bonds in a timely manner. And by the time the county issued their bonds, we were full on in the middle of a pandemic, which increased the costs 40 to 50% as the supply chain issues materialized, with goods not being able to be produced. And so we have found ourselves in a position where if we'd done it on time when we had planned to, it would have been a $210 million project, but it no longer is today. And so we started on part one, a project to do part of it, and that's coming along nicely. So what I want to do is I want to share with you where we are today and where we'd like to be going here going forward. The borders around America Center they don't match those photographs that you just saw of these other cities, but we've been able to figure out how to tackle some of these borders, which quite frankly have been quite barren, and not creating a great experience for the visitor when they come to St. Louis. So the original project, the project highlights included expanding by adding an exhibit hall to the west, adding a new lobby to access that hall, adding new interior corridor connection to be able to move and circulate the people from the new hall and to the new hall throughout the rest of the building. And that interior west corridor would come down to opening to a new pre-function space that would open outside to a new outdoor event space, a full city block, and then would connect through to the rest of the building with a south corridor inside, improvements to the Washington Avenue entrance, and then conversion of 2 of the smaller existing exhibit halls into a new ballroom with a banquet kitchen. So that was the original plan, and that was the funding that the $210 million was supposed to do. Because of the delays and the cost increases, we broke the project into 2 pieces. And so we call it Project 1 and Project 2. And Project 1 began in 2022 and is very nearing completion. We are expecting to have the new exhibit hall turned over from the general contractor to us in just the next few months. We are doubling the number of loading docks. We're adding a new small entrance, new lobby at the intersection of Martin Luther King and 9th Street, and an outdoor food garden as well. These are some of the elements that were part of the original ordinance, which said, here's what we were going to do. And we were able to do those 2 that are in green at the top. One was the acquisition of the real estate that was necessary. So in order to expand the exhibit hall space to the west, in order to expand and put an outdoor event space to the west, and in order to demolish a 1960s garage that had been condemned by the building department and was closed. We had to actually acquire that real estate, and that was done. And then we had to develop the plan for the project to go to the west, which included site prep, demo, and street abatement. And then we began the actual construction project. And those are the things that are underway right now, and that will be finished in the next few months. And then when additional funds became available through some off-the-top funds that both the mayor of the city of St. Louis, the county executive for St. Louis County, and the Regional Convention and Sports Authority, which is the owner of the Dome, all agreed to some $30 million from the RAM settlement funds to help towards this project, which the cost had ballooned. We came back to you and shared with you that with that, we'd be able to do some additional things. Not everything, but some additional things. And those things are now underway. The lobby that was that is being under construction now at Martin Luther King and 9th Street was not a part of the original Project One plan, but we've now been able to start that. And it's a little further behind than the exhibit hall, but it's coming along now. And then we could do some of the outdoor plaza improvements. We couldn't do it all because we couldn't actually connect on the east side to the convention center, but we could do the west and get that started as an outdoor event space. So here's a look at where some of those things are. This is a recent, not the most recent, but a recent photograph that shows you the new loading docks, the expansion of that docks where we extended the roof line. We are covering the docks, and we are putting all of the loading docks inside the building so that we can make an improvement to the neighborhood, which was going to be huge, and doubling the number of them so we can get more freight in for shows and more freight out from the shows faster to turn that space around. And then you can see also, you're kind of looking at this from the corner of Cole Street, which is the street on the left, and 10th Street, which is the street on the right, which 10th Street heads southbound there from Cole. And you can see the work that's going on with that exhibit hall expansion. Here's another look at that exhibit hall expansion, looking from 10th Street east. As you'll note, they're putting up the copper metal panels on the exterior. They're finishing the windows, and that the space in the foreground will actually be one of the last things that gets done when all the equipment gets moved away. And that will be a food farm and a garden with 42 raised planting beds where we're going to be able to grow local produce and herbs for use in the kitchen. Here's another look at the angle of that. This is at Martin Luther King and 10th Street, looking at that same expansion, but looking more towards the north. And you can now see how they're putting the metal panels now starting on the south side of that, working their way towards 9th Street. This is what the end of the loading docks on Cole Street will look like eventually when it's completely enclosed and the metal panels are up and the greenery is in place and the sidewalk is in place to provide great pedestrian access on the south side of Cole Street, which they've never had before. And these big Super St. Louis letters that are placemakers. Here's a look at what that food farm and garden will look like. And here's a look at what it will look like coming down Martin Luther King Drive towards that new lobby at the far end. Inside, there's the look at the lobby. Please don't pay attention to the numbers 2, 3, and 1. We think that the architects were drinking that day. So that's what's all underway. Here's where we'd like to go next. So the rest of the project was described as Project 2. Project 2 funding will be substantially more than what we have with the RAM settlement funds and any additional funds that we're talking now with the mayor's office, with the comptroller's office, and with all of you. So we're basically breaking Project 2 into 2 pieces. And this is the plan for the modified Project 2, which is, if we can get this done and we can get it done in the right time, will make it available for all of this space with all the proper circulation throughout the building from the new exhibit hall and that new lobby at Martin Luther King and 9th, with the addition of the new interior west corridor, will connect all the way north and south to that new space, into the existing space, into the pre-function space that will open up out onto the new outdoor event space. And with that new interior south corridor, will connect back into the Washington area lobby entrance and the rest of the building. It will provide great circulation throughout the building. It will provide us with the new spaces that we look to have. This green space is critically important. Most of the cities that we're competing against have done it or are in the midst of doing it. COVID exacerbated that with people wanting green space and being outside. We don't have access to that right now, but this design gives us the opportunity to do that. And offering a great experience all the way around. It will greatly improve the neighborhood and greatly improve the experience that visitors have to the neighborhood. What it doesn't do, and what's left on the table with this right now, is the conversion of those two smaller exhibit halls into the ballroom and the kitchen. However, if funds would become available later on, we could come in from the south end there where the 9th Street docks are and do that internal conversion within that space. The concrete floor is already poured, the roof structure is already in place, and the column structure is in place. So we could do an internal conversion should additional funds become available later. But right now, what we'd like to do is be able to complete this project in time for some very important events that we have of 2025. Here's another look at what this project would do. What you're looking at here is just a very brief schematic sketch of this interior corridor addition. The white box on the right that you can see at the end of the blue is that new lobby that's under construction right now at Martin Luther King and 9th. What's highlighted in the blue is the north-south new corridor. Will be glass on the outside. The inside will be the existing wall of the convention center, and that will provide that circulation that's needed to get people from the north end of the building down through into that pre-function space, and either go out to the outdoor event space or continue on the path through the new connector on the south end into the Washington lobby. Now, the original plan for this would have had that corridor opening up, and that pre-function space opening up into the new ballroom. But without doing the ballroom, this pre-function space and these corridors will still open up into the current exhibit space. So it's great functionality, even though we're missing having the ballroom feature. Here's just a very preliminary sketch to help illustrate what that corridor looks like. It's not colorized, so you can't tell right now, but the top of that above the glass corridor and the curtain wall at the pre-function space is all that beautiful copper metal panels that you saw that is currently being put on the existing Project 1. So this is what that entrance looks like today. There's a surface parking lot. The surface parking lot was acquired very early on in order to be able to do this west expansion. But as you can see, there's no opening to the convention center right now. What we'll do is we will add the interior corridor and the new pre-function space and the opening to this park. That will be something that will have a great experience and a wonderful, wonderful improvement to the neighborhood. You know, this neighborhood is surrounded by offices, like the T-Rex Innovation Hub is there, the Globe Building is there, the Post-Dispatch Building is there, and businesses like the Holiday Inn and the Courtyard Marriott. It's also surrounded by residents. immediately to the right and the south of this surface parking lot here is Banker's Loft. There are lofts and apartment buildings immediately to the west and all to the north on the Cole Street side. And so you've got infrastructure that we can improve for the convention attendees that also is an improvement for the neighborhood in general. The coordination team, which oversees this project, has representatives from the mayor's office, the comptroller's office, the county executive's office, the Land Clearance Redevelopment Authority. Director Richardson is a member of the coordination team. Ourselves, we do business as Explore St. Louis. Technically, we're the St. Louis Convention and Visitors Commission. And then the St. Louis Municipal Finance Corporation, which is the owner of the building, technically for the city. The project team, the City of St. Louis's Board of Public Service serves as the owner in the project. We serve as the operator in the project. Fentress Architects is the lead architects that oversees many subcontractors that deal with all different aspects of the design, and Kwame Building Group is the program manager. And lastly, this is a winning proposition. This is not an expenditure of funds. This is an investment in St. Louis. This building serves as the tool which provides a year-round infusion of new money coming into St. Louis from outside St. Louis. You know, that list that I showed you of the top groups from last year, you would not have seen on that list the public shows like the Auto Show or Monster Jam or any concerts that we have or any local catering events or many of the other smaller events. Those are all great events and we love having all of them. But the majority of the people who attend those events, majority are from the local area. The big conventions, those ones that I showed you on the top 25 list, the majority of those people are coming from outside St. Louis and they're bringing their money with them. And they're spending it here in all kinds of businesses that we normally think of in the hospitality industry and that we talk about all the time, but all kinds of other businesses that don't even realize half the time that they're a part of the hospitality industry and the service to our community. It also creates a year-round infusion of pedestrian traffic that, quite frankly, St. Louis doesn't see right now. These office buildings aren't busy, and that's not unique to St. Louis. It's, you know, it's happened. The pandemic did that to every city. Our future in downtown, the future is as a tourist destination. It is the future that is built on convention activity and sporting events and people coming here for leisure purposes. And we have to, you know, that we have to have that convention center as a tool, as a part of that. And we develop an army of ambassadors, of people who may have a newfound appreciation for St. Louis by coming here. You know, when they come to a convention, and many of you will go to conventions for your own businesses that you're in and the fields that you're in, someone selects the location of that for you. You aren't deciding where that convention is going to be that year. The staff on that, for that organization, makes that decision. And if you're a member of, you know, an organization that says this year the convention is going to be in St. Louis and you always go to the convention, well, you're coming to St. Louis this year. So you may not come with a great appreciation of how wonderful we are, but you're going to leave with it. So this is an investment that makes money for the community, and we need to make it the best facility that the city can offer so that we can continue to attract that business. And I really do appreciate the support that we've been shown on this. It's been a very challenging experience. It shouldn't have been this challenging. A lot of obstacles got thrown in the way. Some of them, like the pandemic, nobody had any control over. Some of them were political and they weren't city ones, you know, but in the end, this is the right thing to do. And we appreciate the support that we've heard. And I really, truly appreciate the opportunity to be here with you this evening and to be able to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Ms. Ratcliffe. That was very informative and educational. I do just want to ask one question. Was there a specific ask in regards to the needs of the convention center, like a specific allocation ask?
We did not make a specific ask, and I know that you have an ordinance that's a potential that you're talking about. That's 20 million. That's not the ask. It was reported by our local media, two of our local media, both the Post-Dispatch and the Business Journal, that we asked for 20 million. That was not true. We provided the mayor's office and the comptroller's office, and the president of the board of aldermen and Treasurer Lane, actually, even the plan that we just showed you for the modified project 2, and said the $30 million from the Ram settlement doesn't cover it. It's, most likely somewhere in the range of another $30 to $40 million. But if we can find the money to move forward on that, and we can do it fast, we can get it done. We can get that part done in time for these important events that we've got coming in May and June of 2025. And they jumped in and said, let's try to figure out how to make that happen. And this was an idea that they came up with that we are very grateful for, and hope that you're able to figure out how to do that. But we do need more than that 20 million to be able to do this.
Thank you, Ms. Ratcliffe. For this section, I'm gonna go through, I'm gonna allow every alder that is on the call to ask questions. So I will go through you. If you don't want to ask questions, you can just say no questions at this time, but we will start off with Madam President Green.
Thank you, Chairwoman Saunier, and thank you, Kitty, for coming in front of us today. I do want to just be clear and provide context to this, that I had requested that Kitty come in front of this committee after there became an ask that for the $20 million in immediate needs that I think are necessary in order to get the improvements that we need to make good on commitments that we have for 2025. That one of the ideas that has been floated on how to pay for this is using 15 million from interest from ARPA and $5 million from interest from the RAM settlement fund. And given that we have been going through a very public and transparent process around this, even though we are looking at using the potential of using interest from the RAMS money rather than the principal from the RAMS money, I still felt that it was important that we come in front of this committee to have this discussion, and would like to hear from members about thoughts on using that 5 million in RAMS interest money to fill this. I think the thing that we have to recognize is 20 million is not all that we need. We're going to need a full $70 million plus, and we're looking. My office has been working with the other offices on figuring out how to address that additional 50 million that we're going to need. And I think we have some good plans for that, and how in a funding source that could allow us some additional bonding capacity. But we don't have time to take something to a ballot to get that additional bonding authority to be able to meet the commitments for 2025. And so RAMS interest is one of those ways that we could leverage an additional 5 million to help them get to that 20 million. There's also been talk about looking at the capital fund. We did talk with Paul Payne, and capital money can be used on the convention center as well. But I'm really interested in hearing from the committee today before we move forward with a board bill, just to make sure that we are honoring the process that we've set out for RAMS money, that we're having public conversations about this before an ultimate decision is made, that this is the direction that we want to go, and whether the board and this committee feels that we would still be true to the process that we've committed to go through if 5 million of interest funds are used for this purpose. So I just wanted to provide a little bit more context and am interested in hearing from my colleagues at the board tonight and suggestions that you may have or thoughts that you may have on using Rams interest money to help bridge some of this gap as we look for a longer term funding source.
Thank you, President Green. I think we share the same goal and the same hope, and I really want to make sure, especially publicly while we're on the meeting, that I thank you for being so receptive. I got a tour from Ms. Ratcliffe of the convention center that was amazing. And while we had our hard hats on and we're in a golf cart, I was like, you should come to committee of the whole, but let me go talk to the president's office and all the other corresponding parties about that suggestion. And you all were, immediately receptive. And we really shared the idea that we wanted to make sure we were honoring our process. I will just go in order of alders and ward this time. And rather than by seniority, I think I'm just gonna go in order of okay, actually, let's go in order of seniority. I just found that list. Okay, great. Some of you all may not be here, so if they're not here, we'll just skip past them. But for the purposes of making sure that everybody gets an opportunity, in case I'm not seeing someone, we'll go in seniority order. Again, at this time, you can ask any questions or give any comments that you may have, whatever is your preference. And the conversation is around the convention center and specifically the idea of investing some of the Rams settlement towards that. And again, to echo what President Green said, the conversation right now is around using some of the funds we've generated in interest around the convention center. And so while we're not taking a vote, we just want to make sure that we're being clear with the public about, where we are as individuals and thus as a board. Alderman Balmer of the 5th Ward. Alderman Cone of the 3rd Ward. Alderwoman Tyus of the 12th Ward. Alderwoman Spencer of the 8th Ward.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't have, but I appreciate the presentation.
Thank you. Alderwoman Boyd of the 13th Ward. I know that Alderman Oldenburg wasn't able to make it today. Alderman Narayan of the 4th Ward. Alderwoman Clark Hubbard of the 10th Ward.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and to my colleagues, President Green, to all the speakers. This was a lot of information tonight. So listen, questions, I have a lot of them, but I want to go back and me watch this probably about 4, 5, 6, 7, 10 more times, take some additional notes and come back to discuss this. I have some questions from constituents as well, but again, in the interest of time, I'll save those for when we convene again or ask them on the side. I do again want to thank all of the speakers that came in tonight. This was an incredibly informational meeting. I very much understand through previous tours and conversations with Ms. Radcliffe about the value of the St. Louis Convention Center. So I was excited to hear about that, more about that, even where we are with that this evening. And so again, I'm going to go back, gather some more of my notes together and be ready to come back when we discuss this further. Thank you.
Thank you. Alderwoman Schweitzer of the 1st Ward.
Thank you. Thank you all so much for the presentations and for being here so late on your Thursday evening. I know that the $30 million that has gone into this from the RAM settlement fund was a portion of the city's overall amount. So I do want to put in the context that $30 million has gone to the convention center already from the Rams funds. And, we're talking about perhaps spending interest on the convention center. And we're talking about just spending interest if we do a municipal endowment fund. So if we're spending $5 or so million of interest. That would be half of what we might get yearly from the RAM settlement funds. So I just want to put that in perspective. I was looking at the capital committee needs between critical, needed, and desirable, not including the convention center. Our city has $581 million of needs identified by other departments, and $400 million of need identified by the water division. So I just think it's important when we're discussing how our city spends money, no matter what that money is, that we talk about all the needs together. I appreciate the conversation, and I do very much think the convention center is a really important thing in our city, but I also think our streets are important. I think our water is important. And I think and I think our city employees are crucial. So, I'm open to this idea. I'm sorry about my cats that keep making cameos. But I am wanting to make sure that we're keeping in mind the context of the enormous amount of needs that our city has. I understand the comments that Madam President made about not having time to issue bonds to meet specific deadlines, and I do need to know more about that. And I would love if Ms. Radcliffe is able to provide how those other cities funded their convention centers. I would imagine that they mostly funded them through issuing bonds. I doubt that any of them funded those projects through any direct or very little direct payments. And very other cities probably don't have a ton of RAM settlement funds like this either. So I am interested in how that happens. And, I understand the timely nature. But we also do have a lot of other really timely projects in our city. So I appreciate that. And I appreciate that we'll have more conversations in the future about the other funding needs. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderwoman Schweitzer, and I want to thank you for the cat cameos. I really appreciate them. Alderwoman Keys of the 11th Ward. Alderwoman Velasquez of the 6th Ward.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair. Just want to echo my colleagues in saying thank you to all the speakers for hanging out with us on a Thursday night and sharing lots of information. Alderman Lady from the 10th, maybe we should compare our notes on the notes after this. I think just in general, there is a lot to digest. And I want to thank Ms. Ratcliffe also for being here and sharing the information that you did. I'll keep the comments brief about the convention center. I would like to know more, so thank you, Anne, for all the questions, or Alderwoman Schweitzer. I think just the one thing just that I'm thinking about as far as we spend, I mean, sometimes I feel like having this amazing opportunity with a settlement fund is also like money burning a hole in our pockets across the city, right? I think we all want to spend it in some way, somehow, and I just think it's important to note that to be cognitive of this engagement process, but also, $5 million here and there on the interest adds up, and to have, that we're having a plan about how we're going to spend it, because there are a lot of needs in the city. So that's my only comment. Again, I'm sure we'll be talking about this, so thank you all.
Thank you, Alderwoman Velasquez. Certainly agree with this being a lot of information, and so certainly understand needing time to process. Alderman Browning of the 9th Ward.
Thank you, everybody, and appreciate everyone who's stuck with us up until this point. I just echo what some of my colleagues have said. This is a lot of information all at once, and I do have a lot of questions. I no doubt understand the urgency of this request. But our city is a city full of emergencies, so I would urge us to keep that, in mind of the greater context in which we're spending this money. If we spend it bit by bit by bit, it's going to disappear very quick. Like my colleagues, I'd like to dive into this more, but really appreciate the information, and thank you to Ms. Radcliffe for the tour of the convention center. It was really helpful to understand the needs of the center and also what it brings to our city. But we have like I said, a lot of needs in this city. So looking forward to further discussion.
Thank you, Alderman Browning, and I hope you're feeling better. I can hear it a bit in your voice, so certainly hoping for your healing and wellness, and thank you for joining us, even though you're, healing and not feeling your best. Alderman Aldridge of the 14th Ward.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Also, before I go into my comments about the convention center, I want to thank all the panelists earlier that talked about the municipal endowment. I think that's a very important conversation. Since we started this conversation about RAM settlement, we've made it very clear that, we are not trying to spend this money quickly, and we wanted to make sure we have community input. The first thing that we need to get out the door is the ARPA funds, and we still are having conversations about that. And I appreciate how this committee has took the time through the president's office, through each alderperson, to ensure that that we get community input. When it comes to the convention center, this has been something I've been thinking about for a while. I think, like most of us, we've seen something pop up in the news from the Business Journal, which I found to be a little unfortunate as an alderperson who is part of this legislative body, to see that there was already a process kind of laid out, which triggered me and I would say other people to reach out to Ms. Ratcliffe. And I really appreciate Ms. Ratcliffe for providing a lot of information that unfortunately the media wasn't able to provide. The tours and really breaking down the importance of the convention center. And to be honest, as I've been thinking about this for a while, it's kind of like 50-50. I agree with my colleagues. We do have a lot of needs in the city. We need to figure out still with our ARPA funds, as those conversations are pending, how we're gonna move those funds before we start talking about RAMs. But I know as the convention center, sits in the ward, and I've been able to talk to Ms. Ratcliffe in my ward and also Alderwoman Spencer's ward. And just the benefit that it does have for the city of St. Louis, the conventions that it brings to the city of St. Louis. If it wasn't for the convention center and the Rams being there, to be honest, we wouldn't probably even be talking about RAM settlement money, because without the convention center, without the Rams being at the convention center, there would not, and then of course suing, there would not be these conversations that we've been having over the last couple months. So I've personally got to a kind of a better spot in my just opinion. I'm just one of many Alder persons where I believe, if we can't find other avenues. I think Alderwoman Schweitzer just brought up the need of, capital improvement has been a thought, but to be honest, there's not enough funds out there for capital improvement. We have so much that we still need to do with capital improvement for all the buildings throughout the city of St. Louis. So clearly that's probably not an option right now. And as we start to look at the options that we have, that isn't bonds, we still have to figure out with comptroller. I think there's some other options, but that may have to go to like the vote of the people. I am more inclined, if it is just the interest money and we're not touching the Rams, to be in favor of actually using that 5 million for just this part of the convention center. I would be very hesitant if the board were to do this, to do anything else with future funds for the convention center, because I know we've already kind of moved some funds for that. And I think being able to focus on the funds that we have for the RAM settlement to actually do what the community kind of asks for. But note, this is coming from my phone kind of went, as I said, low power. It's been on for a long time. Of using these funds for the convention center, because again, I know how urgent of a need this is, and there is a lot of needs that we talk about through our city. And I think there's other avenues when we talk about things for our city, again, ARPA, that we still need to figure out how we can use that. And I think RAM settlement is another avenue. But if it is just the interest element of RAMs funding, which hopefully with the endowment conversation will continue to grow. I think one of the presentations we've seen that can grow to like 150 million, 200 million, right? If we were just touching the interest money, I do know how critical when we talk about the growth also of St. Louis for the people that are here, but also the people that we want to move to the city. I believe that the convention center is a anchor that can really continue the revitalization of the city of St. Louis as we try to work to and just improve our current infrastructure and needs that we currently have. So after thinking about this for several weeks, in short terms, I am moved to a place where I'm not completely opposed to if we don't have other avenues, and we need to be thinking about this quickly, because I know there's some pending things that the convention center has coming in the near future. Not opposed to using just that 5 million, or even potentially, I know we're using 15 from ARPA, maybe just the whole 20. So I think, we need to figure out a solution quickly, but I want it to be collaborative between the legislative branch, the executive branch, and Ms. Ratcliffe to figure out what is necessary, and not us figuring it out through media and then board bills being filed. And we kind of have to get to this point.
Thank you, Alderman Aldridge, for that insightful feedback. All of your points are well taken, and I would second. President Green, I see you have your hands up. Did you have any additional questions or comments?
Yeah, oh, apologies. I just wanted to ask a couple things of Ms. Ratcliffe, just to make sure that this is all out in the ether. But as of right now, you are at capacity with the previous bonds that have been issued. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. The $210 million is gone. We do have the 30 million, and so we can start the work on the park, which we want to do, but we wouldn't be able to make the connection into the building and do that circulation internally.
Okay, and in order to get additional bonding capacity, we would have to have another funding source to underwrite those bonds.
I think that's a question for the comptroller, in terms of whether is there capacity within the city to issue bonds from existing revenue streams.
Okay, my understanding is that at this point in time, we're kind of maxed out in that arena and would need an additional funding source, and that's what we've been looking at. And so I just also want to put it out into the ether that even if we were to bring forth an additional funding source, it would have to go to the ballot. The absolute earliest it could go on the ballot would be August, and then there would have to be, typically there's a few month delay before a tax or a fee goes into effect, and which would put even the issuance of additional bonds, it would push that into at least the first quarter of 2025, which is past when these renovations are needed in order to meet those obligations. So I just wanted to be clear in laying out that process as well. And the reason we're looking at funds that we can access without having to go and exercise additional bonding capacity because of the time that takes through.
Yeah, I appreciate your saying that. As I noted in the timeline, this project should have been finished by now. If the bonds, if the project had moved forward in the time frame that it was supposed to be, it would have been finished in 2023. And so, every group that we have coming in, we've been dealing with uncertainty about the timing of construction, the timing of different elements that could need to be completed that we promised that we were going to have. It's been a very challenging time to go through. So now we're in a position where we've got events coming in May and June that, we absolutely have to have this next piece done, or we're in big trouble. So anything that you can do, I really appreciate it. I think I appreciated the fact that the mayor and the comptroller put their heads together and came up with this idea. And I really appreciate President Green, how hard you and I know that Alderman Aldridge was with you, and just trying to figure out with Alderman Spencer how to figure out some additional funding that is a little easier to do in order so that we can be successful as St. Louis. And as I said, I don't want to ramble on about this, but it's not an expense. It's an investment in St. Louis that's critical for our future, and the investment that we make on it will last for decades.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you working with myself and Alderman Aldridge and Alderwoman Spencer and Alderwoman Saunier to kind of help us wrap our minds around this and figure out and understand kind of both the immediate and long-term needs around this and why this is a something that is being considered. I also want to give props to Alderwoman Saunier. As soon as this hit the media, she called me up and said, okay, we got to add this to the committee of the whole agenda, because like I said, we want to be very intentional about our process and the use of Rams money, even if it is the interest. Because I think the public is really looking to us to make sure that we are being open and transparent throughout this entire process and not just making decisions about how these funds are being used behind closed doors. So I appreciate you coming in front of us. I think there's going to be more discussions to be had about this, but hopefully this gives some context to some of those media discussions that came out before there was opportunity to really start to have some of those background conversations with folks and see what people were thinking and making sure that we're able to, as a board, continue to honor the process that we've laid out. So thank you so much for working with us on this.
No, I thank you. And, as I think I already said, but the last thing we wanted was to have this in the media. And when we got those calls, it's just very unfortunate because the process should be followed. And so we appreciate your willingness to continue to work on this, despite, not hearing about it for the first time in the media, that everybody has really come to the table on this. And so many of you have come and taken the tours and expressed support. So look forward to continuing it. And I really do thank you for the opportunity to be here tonight and have this chance. And although Craig Lucas hasn't said anything, I appreciate his support for being here tonight too. Squami's doing a great job for us. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. I just wanted to echo Mr. Coleman, Ryan Coleman, who is our financial analyst at the Board of Aldermen and does phenomenal, extraordinary, always above and beyond work. Just put something in the chat, and I want to make sure I uplift that. He just wanted to add that any other new potential revenue streams, notwithstanding general revenue bonds, could be issued to fund the improvements, but will require voter approval and a property tax / levy increase. So I think that really ties to what President Green mentioned earlier about kind of the situation that we find ourselves in with the immediate need or, soon come need for the funding, but the process that it would take to get that type of initiative on the ballot. I want to make sure I heard from everyone before I gave my comments. I think that the convention center and the benefit of the convention center are really clear. I think what Alderman Aldridge uplifted about us not even having these RAM settlement funds, if not for the convention center, are also really key. And so even in my own conversations with different, with different colleagues, I think I've not heard any opposition from any single person about the idea of making sure that the convention center having what they need. What I have heard is just colleagues kind of uplift that there's a number of critical needs in our city, and sometimes it's not always as apparent as a convention center with specific deadlines and budgets and things like that. But certainly, we know that there's other systems in our city that are in dire need of investment and of enough funds. And so, just again, I want to thank you all for coming. I think for me, one of the things that's most interesting to see, again, I want to make sure I say that I'm very not investing in our convention center at all. I think that it would not take anyone a lot to understand the benefit of that. But for me, it is interesting to see the times when we decide as a city that despite not having regional activity, we want to take action. I know when we talk about the unhoused issue, I've heard a lot of people say, well, we need our regional partners to step up and we need people to answer that call and step up and do that work. And I don't disagree with that at all. But I think that this is an example of a time where the convention center, which is a need, but it is something that technically there was regional partners that were supposed to play a role. And it does seem like we're not having a conversation about if we're going to find the funds. We're having a conversation about how we will find the funds. And I certainly am an advocate for us applying that type of mentality and approach to a number of issues of across our city, but certainly our unhoused issue. You know, I know it's not the same, perhaps not the same yield in investment right away as far as return of investment, but I would say in this case where there's an economic incentive, we have a moral incentive to have the same approach to many issues across our city. And that's really my thoughts on this issue. And I want to make sure I bring that up and uplifted that point. And again, Ms. Radcliffe, thank you so much for coming. You so graciously accepted. You were not nervous at all about stepping into this DENS room with each of my colleagues. You know, I was clear, you know, that I would give every single one of them a chance to answer questions, and you really welcomed that and embraced that. And so did the president's office, and so did the mayor's office. So just want to thank you all as we talk about generational transformative things. I think demonstrating collaborative and cohesive leadership and transparency and accessibility is something that I hope generations can see that model from us today as well. And with that, I think that it is 8:46. So I want to thank everybody who came and stayed the course. And even those who came and couldn't stay the course, thank you for joining us. You could be watching Netflix, you could be watching a brand new reality TV show, and you're here. So just thank you all for tuning in today. And with that, I will entertain a motion to continue the committee of the whole for a date and location to be determined.
So moved.
Second.
It has been moved by the Alderwoman of the 10th and seconded by President Green that we continue to.
No, motion was made by me, seconded by Alderwoman Schweitzer.
Oops, sorry. Okay, that's what I meant. Okay, motion has been motioned by President Green and seconded by the Alderwoman of the first lucky ward in our city to continue the committee of the whole for a date and location to be determined. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. You all have a great night.